sermon is going to be based on the epistle of Corinthians, chapter 12, verses 2 to 10. And I want to talk to you about a pain in the foot. Because all of us seem to have them. I love today's scripture from Paul. And to me, what I hear Paul talking about especially is to be humble, to know who and what you are. Don't think any more of yourself than you ought. Be realistic. And in addition to that, I hear Paul saying, when you find something blessed in someone else, brag about them. Lift them up. But don't become so high and mighty that you are no longer useful to God to share His love and His word. It is truly a reminder all of us need to have in our lives. Paul talks about this pain, this thorn in his flesh. And he talks about how many times he prayed for this to go away. And then Paul talks about how it was God's reminder to him that he was less than perfect. It was God's reminder to him to keep him from being an arrogant jerk. It was God's reminder to him to give him humility and to make him remember all that he is when it comes to serving God is at the hands of Jesus Christ. Specifically, toward the end of his message, he points that out to us. He says, when we experience weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ, that's important to remember. When we experience these struggles and trials and difficulties for the sake of Christ, meaning because we are trying to live a Christian life, not just because we're rude, or not just because we make bad decisions, or not just because we like to be a bully, or not just because we spend money irresponsibly. Paul's not talking about many choices and behaviors we make that have nothing to do with serving God. When we make choices like that, we will experience some difficulties. That's cause and effect, natural consequences. Paul is specifically talking about when we are engaged in the process of serving Christ and we experience difficulty, we should rejoice. We should be glad. For God says, my power is made perfect in your weakness. And this is the scary part about living in our weakness and sharing our weakness. When we want to serve God and we want to be faithful, the scary part is those elements of our life, the weakness, they're constantly telling us, you are not a good Christian. They are constantly saying, don't serve, don't volunteer. They're constantly saying things like, don't be patient with those people who don't know too much about doing things. Get rid of them. No, those voices are trying to draw us away from our commitment to serve. Those voices are trying to tell us that we are not good enough. And God says, I am made perfectly powerful in your weakness, especially when you remember you're weak. Especially if you are vulnerable enough to share that weakness, to invite others into faith. I know it's difficult to talk about our struggles. Man, what politician in the world gets up there and really tells it the way it is, where they've made a mistake and where they're confused and where they don't know things? They don't want to do that too often because it projects such a weakness. And they're all all afraid of weakness and judgment. And Paul is teaching us today, our weakness is not the end of the world. Our weakness is the reminder that we rely upon God's grace in our life. This scripture is the only reason I can stay a pastor. That's it. I always think there's a battle that goes on, especially for people who take spiritual leadership roles, whether it's in a church, in a ministry, or as a pastor. But anytime we step forward to be spiritual leaders, we are subject to a large battle. And we have to expect that some of those we will deal with and overcome, and some may just be the stone in our shoe, and we learn to walk a little slower. Today I want to encourage you to serve God to the best of your ability, to bring your weaknesses to Christ and ask for them to be removed, but to know that God always responds, "My grace is sufficient for you." And not to let evil win. Because when evil convinces us we are not the spiritual leader we are, then we have lost that great strength that God says He brings out in our weakness. My grace is sufficient for you.